I'm Ian Bremmer, and this is G0 Media. When I talk about a G0 world, I mean a world without global leadership, where the United States refuses to be the world's policeman and no other country or countries are filling that void. In 2017, I started a media company to share intelligent, insightful, nonpartisan analysis about what's happening around the world. We launched a TV show, G0 World, where every week on public television, I interview world leaders, experts, and newsmakers.
I do not defend a narrow platform or rights of a political party.
We're helping Ukraine, and we are going to prevail again.
If we're not talking about human rights elsewhere in the world, no one else will.
Our newsletter, G0 Daily, comes out every morning, 5 days a week. And we've got special weekly editions on artificial intelligence and the US-Canada relationship. Plus, I write my own column every Wednesday afternoon. If you want more geopolitics, of course you do. G0 Media also has podcasts.
Humans don't fight over territory and food. They fight over imaginary stories in their minds.
Digital video series. Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week.
Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here, and a happy new year 2024 from Antarctica.
We're here in Chicago wrapping up the Democratic National Convention for 2024.
And brand partnerships like our Global Stage series produced with Microsoft.
The word war requires calibration.
Cyber weapons move literally at the speed of light. So this is a real set of challenges.
There's also reporting from around the world.
أنا اسمي عبير جميل العيسوي قاعدة بمخيم شتيلة.
A lot of the people that are absorbing a lot of this fight were bakers, dentists, doctors.
And yes, we have puppets.
I didn't see either Barbie or Oppenheimer.
Hello, Santa.
Because at G0, we believe there's a better way to help people understand the forces reshaping our world. So come check us out. It's all available at g0media.com and across our social channels.
Please welcome Ian Bremmer and Leslie Kleinberg.
Thank you so much. I have a whole list of questions, but the puppets reminded me, but because I think we're like first generation Sesame Street, Schoolhouse Rock, Monty Python.
Monty Python, absolutely.
Muppet Show, yeah. So, we'll talk about serious things like the New York Film Festival.
I'm just going there, right?
Yeah. Well, it's just this idea of using storytelling to communicate what can be very complex notions and ideas. Can we just take a step back and talk a little bit about what G0, why you started that, and why do you think it's important and to use these different mechanisms, tools to tell these stories, different ways to tell stories, to communicate information about finance, about the globe, and make it available to people? What has compelled you to make that shift in your own work?
Global politics aren't going well right now. And it's not that the world is not going well. If you were an alien and you look down at the planet, you would see far fewer people that are hungry. You'd see far more education. You'd see far more women actually getting into the workplace. You'd see urbanization. You'd see all these, in the last 50 years, compared to any other time, you'd say, wow, these people are getting it together. And yet, when you talk about politics, when you talk about the way we actually notionally arrange our interconnectivity with each other, it's driving us crazy. And I find that unacceptable. And I know that we're not that way. But when you read the headlines and when you are driven algorithmically, it drives us apart. Because people are not right now being treated by our media networks and our information networks. They're not being treated as citizens. They're being treated as products. And so the purpose of starting G0 was to do the opposite of that. And if that means it doesn't make a lot of money, that's okay. We have a large enough platform that we can get away with that. But we do want to scale. But the point is that scale will not drive us. The business model is actually the mission. The business model isn't the shareholder. And so that's why we're doing this. And it needs to be long form. But the funny thing is, I've been thinking these ideas for decades now because it's fairly obvious that, we're in this, what I call a geopolitical recession, a period where the politics are just, the institutions, the rules of the road just aren't aligned with the balance of power. Used to be, isn't anymore. Balance of power shifted. Institutions haven't. UN is feeling that really badly right now, but everybody is. And so it leads to a lot of conflict. But what made me actually start this was something much simpler than that. I used to do Charlie Rose's show all the time. I think I was on it 126 times. Mike Allen was his most frequent guest. I was number 2. But on Foreign Affairs, and what was amazing is that like I would go in and you could have a half an hour conversation about what was happening in the world. You can't do that anywhere else that had scale. So when he lost his show, right? I mean, obviously for very good reason. Ian's problem was it's all about me. Ian's problem was that I no longer had a place to go to do long form. You know, I mean, I could go talk at a university for an hour. I mean, I could immerse myself. But in terms of a media platform, everything was it was all just headlines. And so I had to start G0 first and foremost so that I had a way to keep talking about these issues to the public.
Well, as you say that, it makes me think so much about just obviously the consolidation, corporatization of media. That's one thing, and the change in our culture. You can go back to the Gore Vidal, Christina, those Buckley debates and start to think about how our culture and the media has changed in terms of pontification, right? Editorialization. You had to go your show's on PBS,
yep.
Gives you that, allows you in some ways the opportunity to have that longer form that seems to be absent with those larger corporate entities now.
Yeah, I mean, look, PBS is, I think, still pretty strongly respected in the United States, right? As being, I mean, had Judy Woodruff, I mean, like, this is the kind of person that, because back in the day, Walter Cronkite or, sort of even Dan Rather and Peter Jennings and Tom Brokaw, I mean, it didn't matter who your preference was. Yeah, they were mostly men, but it didn't matter who your preference was, you'd kind of get the same news. And, if you look on our shows, we talk to everybody. I mean, this is not Fox. This is not CNN. I mean, I had Steve Bannon on. I mean, I had Glenn Greenwald on, which was a great show. I'll give you a good example. That something that I think that we can do because it's PBS, because we own it, because it's independent. So when Milei was running for president in Argentina, Javier Milei, and he, by the way, he's one of the people that just on the stage in the General Assembly has probably delivered the most directly combative anti-UN speech, right? I mean, like here we are, this is not a friend of the UN. But I thought Milei was gonna fail because Argentina was in free fall, because he was talking about dollarization, which would have been a disaster, and because the Peronists in Argentina, who control the trade unions and a lot of the governorships, and many of them are quite corrupt, were going to prevent him from doing any of this stuff. I was wrong. And over the course of the first 4-6 months, it became very clear that actually a lot of what he was doing, first of all, he was much more pragmatic than he had campaigned. And secondly, that a lot of the people on the other side recognized, at least he'll be responsible for this. We got to give this guy a chance to fix some of this stuff because otherwise it's never going to get done. And we won't take the blame because it's him if it goes badly. So, I mean, just a few weeks ago, if you look now, he removed price controls on real estate in Argentina. And everyone thought, that was going to make prices shoot up. Prices have gone down 40%. So people now have a better shot of actually getting an apartment in Argentina. So I came out about 2 months ago, I'm going to say. Yeah. And said, look, I want to tell everybody why Milei's doing well and why I was wrong. And by the way, I'm delighted to have been wrong because it's good for the Argentine people. So he reached out and he said, I'm so happy you did that. No one is willing to actually say they're wrong. I'm like, well, because my analysis has nothing to do with my personal preferences, right? Right? I mean, if you're watching people on the news and all of their analysis lines up neatly with their personal preferences, they are bullshitting you, right? Stop watching those people. Confirming your priors isn't helpful, right? That's not useful. It feels good, but it's horrible for political information. So anyway, so he got in touch, and at that point, he had done one interview in the United States, one TV interview. You know who was with? Anyone know? Tucker Carlson. No, Fox would have been fine. What Fox? At least it's Fox. Tucker Carlson, right? And it was horrible. It was as bad as the Putin thing. And it looked bad, and it was disinformation. It made him look like an idiot, like a madman. And it was so partisan. And I told him, I said, if you come on and do my show, I will actually give you a proper, 45 minutes. We'll have a long conversation, put it on the podcast, and everyone will see it. And he said, okay, that's good. And so we did it. And it was great. Yeah. And people from all over the spectrum engaged. It was wonderful. But you can do this. It's just not the way that our media is set up.
And do you see that different anywhere else? I mean, or everywhere else? Or how do you see these trends in terms of media and this kind of representation?
It's happening in other places. I mean, in Brazil, I'm sure you've seen that, Twitter X was banned recently, and social media is directly in the crosshairs because disinformation was a big piece of January 8th, which was their January 6th. So when the military came in and the former president came in and tried to subvert the outcome. The subversion was worse than the United States, but the snapback from the system was stronger. I mean, remember, here in the United States, you had all these people up in arms about, we got to have a free and fair transition. But then, several months later, you've got rallies going on where the January 6th demonstrators are being lionized as patriots, right? In Brazil, they've prevented Bolsonaro from running in the next election because they actually went through and the legal system stopped it. Now, but if you ask me, is there at least as big of a disinformation space where the two sides don't think they're on the same planet, don't believe in the same facts? Yeah, that's a very serious problem. It is less of a problem in Japan. It's less of a problem, though it's growing, and we're not helping, in Canada. And so, and I will say there are a lot, when people ask me in America, how should I change my media consumption patterns? And one is that I'm trying to do something about it, so please follow our stuff. But another thing, and something I do and I tell my students at Columbia to do, is spend an hour every week and watch Deutsche Welle in English from Germany, or watch Nikkei in Japan, or watch even the CBC in Canada. Because when you look at their news and how they cover the world, and yes, the U.S. is, still gets the lion's share, but it is not remotely like. Because if you watch CNN normally and you say, well, I'm just going to watch a lot of Fox, that actually makes it worse, right? Because all you're doing is hate watching. All you're doing is watching and saying, oh, these idiots, I don't believe it. That doesn't help you at all. What you want is a view of the news where you're like, oh, wait a second. So that's how other people see us right now? Yeah, they're just trying to figure it out. So I don't think that this is as much of a challenge in most of the advanced industrial democracies, and you feel that in the state of our political system right now, definitely.
Well, where we go, a lot of other countries go in so many instances, and I think with the media, we've seen this in other countries. But I certainly am curious. It's funny that you mentioned the Brazilian elections and talking about being here at the UN and all of the issues that come up that are so pressing. Almost daily, we're hearing press conferences and other things about particular conversations that are happening this week. What are you hearing and seeing that you think are the stress points, the points of connection that you're experiencing and hearing and talking about here? I know AI has been part of a big discussion, but what are these points of stress, but also points of connection that you're seeing?
AI has been by far the most positive, and I'm delighted to have played a role in that because it's a place where global governance is happening. And is desperately needed. It comes from a complete blank space, but that's not the dominant conversation. It's gotten a lot of play. The dominant conversation this week is either the Middle East or it's U.S. elections, and they're not really that related. In the Middle East, I mean, I was at a dinner. This is off the record, right? Yeah, I was at a dinner on Sunday. I just want to know how much I can tell you. I was at a dinner on Sunday night with most of the Middle Eastern leaders that were here. So I mean, the foreign ministers, prime ministers, that kind of thing. And I mean, the room, the read of the room was, this is the worst it's been since 1967. I mean, you just had, whatever it was, 600 Lebanese killed in a day, which is as it's more than half the total number of casualties they had in the 2006 war. And nobody believes we're heading towards a two-state solution, and nobody believes that the Palestinians are actually going to have a sustainable future. But it's not going to get fixed. They're not in a position to do anything about it. And the revealed preference is they're not going to do anything about it. So that's a big conversation. And Netanyahu is here, the Israeli prime minister, is here today. I'll tell you what I think is going to happen, right? And you're not going to be happy about this. I think that he's going to succeed in the war in the south of Lebanon. He's going to push Hezbollah back. Hezbollah does not have the capacity to effectively attack Israel. I mean, they could do some things, but they'd get blown up. So I don't think they'll do it in a big way. I think that Netanyahu and his government will then bring the 60,000 Israelis back to their homes and their schools. They've been evacuated for nearly the last year. That's the equivalent of like 2.5 million Americans. So imagine if the entire state of New Mexico were evacuated for a year after 9/11. That would be the only thing we're talking about all day. So that is the importance of this in Israel. And because he is accomplishing that for the first time in a year, his party is now more popular than any other party. So he's going to do all of this, he's going to call elections, and he's going to win. That's what I think is going to happen. So that's where we are right now. And Biden's going to look super weak, but fortunately, he's not running again. So it doesn't matter as much. It doesn't hurt as much the Kamala campaign. Trump and Kamala are very different on the Middle East. They're very similar on China. But it's not really a U.S. conversation. It's really a Middle East conversation. Second most important thing, U.S. elections. Different leaders have very different perspectives, not on what's going to happen because nobody knows, but on what the implications are. And also just what the implications are for a United States that just does not have consistent willingness to engage, to lead, to support multilateralism, rule of law, rules of the road, the rest of the hypocrisy. I mean, I was just with the Indonesian foreign minister, who I love. And, you know, this is the largest Muslim country in the world. And she said, you know, 5 years ago, if you would ask the Indonesian people, overwhelmingly, they would say they really don't trust the Chinese. They like the United States. Just 5 years ago. And in fact, the U.S. Embassy, I remember at the time, the U.S. Embassy was getting more traffic from Jakarta than in any other country in the world. People just wanted to know, like, what's America up to? How do I go there? How do I get a job? How do I engage? Get a university degree? She said, that's not true anymore. Just in the last year, it's not true anymore. You know why? Gaza. Just Gaza. She's like, you know, for us, this is a domestic issue because it's a Muslim issue. And people just do not tolerate the hypocrisy, and they're just not willing to stand for it. So that is becoming, in that regard, a global issue. But you have other leaders that actually think that Trump is beneficial to them, or they're not sure. And so it's a huge conversation. It's a very different story, and also provides a lot of opportunity for countries to think about what their strategy should be in a new global order. So I'd say those are probably the most important things. You'd think that Ukraine would be a big deal. The Ukraine story is getting boxed out by those two things. So Zelensky, he gave his speech at the General Assembly, and it was largely an empty audience there. And, you know, it's been going on for 2.5 years now. People are getting tired. Climate change, of course, still gets an enormous amount of effort. I am actually optimistic about climate change. Not because it's not going to get worse, it'll get worse, but because we've built the institutions, the money is being spent. You can now see that in the next 20 years, at scale, post-carbon energy and transmission will be cheaper than carbon. So, I mean, like, it is too late, but it is happening. You know, it's like we can do it. It turns out we have big problems. You can actually, climate is a big enough problem for us to respond to, as opposed to just be complacent about. But this year, it is not what most people are talking about. Not at this event. And can I say one more thing? I think it's interesting. One more thing, little thing. Because, you know, this is an exhausting week, right? People are tired. There's a lot of traffic. You're going to all these meetings, all these parties, everything else. I get it. But I will tell you, I think, like, people always say, how can we make it better? I think one way to make it better is do this week 4 times a year. Because I see how these world leaders, when they come together, when they engage with each other, when they have real conversations in the same room, suddenly their priors get challenged and the cognitive dissonance ebbs away. And they, wait a second, I kind of like that person. I'll work with that person. But it only works in a room together. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. It is so worth it. I can give you so many examples of things I have witnessed this week that will move the needle. And it won't happen again like this for a year. Not Davos, not the COP, not Munich. Those are all self-selected groups that are truly subglobal. They're much, much narrower. They're the equivalent of Fox and CNN. Davos is an even narrower slice of the world than CNN and Fox are. This is not. This is everybody. And so for me, this is the most important event in the world. And as an American, I'm so proud that it was our country that set this up. And I think part of the reason why now there are big debates and now the Americans frequently criticize the UN is because we kind of know that we're not standing up to these values that are our values today. We know that, and we feel bad about it. And so the easiest thing to do is ignore that and criticize the UN. That's I think, what's happening. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about when you're a civilian, kind of as I might feel, or many of us might feel, taking in all of the information about all the discussions, et cetera. How should we think about how all of those things affect us directly? And how important is it that we communicate that connection to people in terms of all, how it's easy to kind of say, well, that doesn't affect me, or maybe think that it doesn't. How can we get people around the idea that all of these things, do affect them directly, and how do we make those connections?
Well, it's always about meeting people where they are. So if they feel like it doesn't affect them, maybe it's because some parts of it don't. So there are a lot of people. So, I mean, in America right now, we all agree that democracy is pretty broken. We all agree that, like, this election, they're trying to destroy democracy. We just don't agree on who they are, right? But so why is that? Like, what do the Democrats think and what do the Republicans think, right? The Democrats take a look at this guy who's clearly unfit for office, and who is transactional and doesn't really care about democracy versus autocracy, and say, this guy is a criminal, he's a thug, and he's going to break our institutions. A lot of you are probably sympathetic to that view. There are a lot of Republicans, and there are also like independents in both these camps, that will look at the United States and say, this country is not a democracy. They'll say that establishment players, people with access to power and money, including the media, including educators, including scientists, have for a very long time enriched themselves and not cared about the average American. And they've done it with a coin-operated democracy. And that's unacceptable. And the only way this is ever going to get fixed is if someone comes in and breaks it. And it's a grievance-based campaign. So I think, yes, these things do matter to them. But the point is that if your own system is not responding to what it means to be a representative democracy, then the idea of promoting your system to other countries of the world is not going to be attractive, right? So I think it's first trying to address why it is that people feel disaffected, disassociated, why the ennui exists. This also this election has a greater gender gap in preferences than I've ever seen in the United States. We got to talk about that, right? Because it means that it's not just about the algorithms. It's also about something that is being experienced right now inside the country, and we're ripping each other apart. Yeah. So I start that with that. I don't start with, oh, here's why you should care about Gaza, By the way, I did have I gave the graduation speech up at Columbia at SIPA this year, which was a dicey time to do that, right? And there were a lot of students wearing keffiyeh and with Palestinian flags and all of the rest, and there was chanting. And first of all, I was deeply sympathetic to students protesting, because it's not like these students were pro-Hamas. I have a lot of students, there were almost none of them that would identify with that, and even those that didn't understand what it was they were identifying with. But more broadly, it was because they've been raised to believe that the Americans are the good guys. And what they are experiencing right now is dissonant with that.
And this is just the most obvious manifestation today of that. But we experienced it in Vietnam, and we've experienced it with climate change. We've experienced with big capitalism, big tobacco, big oil, big pharma, all of that stuff, right? So I said to them, I know that you're all focused on Gaza right now, but I want to tell you, like, we haven't been talking much about Ukraine. And from my perspective as a political scientist, Ukraine actually matters a lot more. Not because it's white people in Europe, though I know that's why most people are paying more attention to it, but actually because the impact for oil, for gas, for fertilizer, for food. I mean, if you care about the dispossessed around the world, if you care about like the 3 billion people that don't have access still to the SDGs that we all agree is the way that the Sustainable Development Goals that everyone's trying to get to, well, I mean, the war in Ukraine is doing more to hurt those people, right, than anything else. But no one talks about it like that, right? So I do think trying to connect how we're all in a little world, like, because there it's inflation. Like, did you notice that your egg prices were higher? Well, how do you think that was for these people, right? So I think you can do some of that, and then but you have to start with who they are. You have to start with where they are, and that's. I'll do one more quick thing. So I was with my buddy Chris Coons last night, who's I adore. Senator of Delaware, co-chair of the campaign for Kamala and whatnot. And we were talking about, he was like, what do you think my biggest weakness is? It's kind of a funny question, right? What do you think my biggest weakness is? I said, aside from the fact that you just asked me that question, I mean, like, because that's obviously, that's a layup. I'm going to smack that. No, I said, I'll tell you something interesting. I think that your biggest strength as someone who knows a lot about foreign policy is that you really know retail. Like, I see you go into a local crowd of, firemen or, sort of labor unionists or whatever, and you, no matter who they are, you talk to them, you engage with them. I don't care what their political preference is. At the end, you really get to know them. I think your biggest weakness from a foreign policy perspective is you don't have that. You haven't done that on the global stage in the same way. It's like where I go to Davos, I go to the UN, I know all those people. Like, I engage with them, but I don't have the experience doing retail the way that you do. I think those things are really important things. Again, you got to meet the people where they are. Like, I know how to meet the people at Davos where they are. But if you want to be effective, you've got to be able to do that. I think it's super, super important. That's what storytelling is. And I mean, I do foreign policy work, and I'm talking to all these global leaders, but I grew up in the projects. It took me 8 years to get into the Council on Foreign Relations because I didn't have those connections. I never wanted to be in Washington because that didn't seem like a job that like anyone like me would ever want to do. Like, who are those people? But that creates more connectivity when you're meeting with non-Americans, when you're meeting with foreign policymakers in other places. I think one of the reasons I have such a good relationship with the Secretary General at the UN is because we kind of connect in that way, in a way that when he meets establishment policymakers from Washington, they're kind of other to him. Right? So I think it's really about understanding who these people are and how to connect with them. Yeah.
One of the themes of this particular discussion also is how the connection between what is happening here at UNGA and the New York Film Festival and Cole Art in general. For me, of course, the festival is at the end, starts tomorrow. We talk a lot about traffic during this time. That is true. Avoid this part of the city, et cetera. But, more importantly, I see that a lot of the issues, stories, themes, ideas, and just generally the humanity that comes to the United Nations is reflected by artists. That's what artists do, right? They reflect the world and then they put it into whatever art it is, whether it's film, whether it's fine arts, etc. We have a film, Apocalypse in the Tropics, that we're going to show from Petra Costa, which is about the election in Brazil. It's a wonderful film. There are so many films that are either narrative films or documentaries straight on looking at an issue. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see film, certainly as a person who's a New Yorker, also someone who's in the center of the cultural center of the world as well. How do you see filmmakers and other artists, the importance of them incorporating their stories, their experiences in order to communicate these larger, more complex issues and ideas?
Well, so first, for a second, I'm going to talk about the idea that we want to avoid this part of the city because of traffic.
Because, no, it connects to what we're about to talk about. Because, of course, you know, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. Is that what you want to do when the UN is here is you want to embrace this part of the city, and you don't want to be in a taxi. You want to be walking on the street. That's who we are. It's what we do. The whole world is here. You're walking on the street, and you are actually involved and engaged with your community. And put your fucking phone down, you know? Like, I mean, you know, this is an opportunity, a unique opportunity. The world is here, and we get to see it and experience it, and I love it. I mean, I am, like, on the streets all week. I mean, you know, you should have seen me and Jake Sullivan yesterday, which was 2 days ago? 2 days ago. Yeah, 2 days ago. He's coming one way on Park, across the median. I'm coming the other way. He's got like 6 members of his national security, of his security folks around me. And I'm like, this isn't going to go well. So I just go like this. You know, because I want to do the most defensive possible posture. Like, I am not a threat. I'm like Moose, my Norfolk Terrier. It's not a problem. You know, just love me. And the front security guy's having none of it. But he looks up and is like, oh, a friendly, okay. And then I'm inside, and then we have like our little bilat, like on the median strip on Park Avenue, which is really cool. Where else can you do that, right? And it's just phenomenal. And there are people demonstrating, and there are cultural groups, and they're just all here. It's not like you need to know who all these people are. Here they are. So one, don't avoid that part of the city. Embrace that part of the city. That's the throughput of everything we're talking about. Something feels uncomfortable, a little challenging. Okay, be a part of it. You know, see what it is. So what do I think about film? You're gonna hate this because most of my film watching is on like a little screen on an airplane. I know because when I'm not in an airplane, I got too much shit to do. But
at least you didn't say you watch it on your phone because almost. It is by degree worse.
I know it's horrible. But but of course, the thing that I think is most wonderful about film, and I have no expertise at this, but I just love how immersive it is. Because unlike watching cable and unlike engaging in social media, you have to just suspend all of your priors. You have to suspend all of your existing connections, and you are immersed in someone else's story. And I love that. Of course I do. Yeah, and that's why we love to do a lot of work from other countries, because suddenly you're on the screen, you're like, whoa, that's what someone in Syria is really like? That's really cool. And that's, for me, that's the best use case for Apple Vision, which I hate. I tried it on once. I'm like, I'm not doing this, okay? This is like already way too far from, you know, it's Ready Player One. But if you told me that you could limit it to a short period of time and the only thing you were doing on it was actually being immersed in someone else's world, that's pretty exciting, right? That'll help. Yeah.
But that is what the movies are.
That is what the movies are.
Yeah, being immersed in somebody else.
Yeah.
You know? Well, certainly, I mean, the connection is real in terms of everyone is experiencing, particularly post-COVID, the experience of watching movies. All right, maybe on a airplane, but mostly in our homes because many of us now have screens that are big and sound that sounds great, and how we receive younger people, what they even consider a film versus something else. The semantics are very different. But the context in which I'm talking about is the way that we can take these really complicated stories and create those connections. Everyone wants to see themselves reflected in the media. That's how they feel like they're there. They're a real person. They're being seen, right? Either when you're going to other countries and you're I guess I'm just thinking about how Americans get reflected back out to the world. It's a majority of what people are seeing, right? And we don't get that opportunity as much to see other people's worlds reflected. So that's why I feel like certainly the New York Film Festival, but all of the arts somehow allow us that moment of the artists. That's the essence of what they do. They're taking their lives, taking the lives of all of us, and creating something that's unique, that tells that story. And you use puppets, and so that's and that's a version of that.
It's a great version of it. I loved The Muppet Show when I was a kid. It was sophisticated. It was intelligent. Well, first, I was one of these kids. I like books more than film. Okay, because for me that's the ultimate immersion. Because I'm just go off, and I was one of these kids. I think that a very easy way to tell when I was a kid if I would really connect with someone else is if their favorite book was also Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay, and you could tell where like if it was a kid that actually like, it's like you don't want to date a guy that likes Ayn Rand, right? That's an obvious tell, right? I mean, it's getting you a very specific thing, right? And then there were Hobbit kids, and there were Narnia kids, and they were a little more cautious and conservative, but they liked storytelling, all of that stuff. So anyway, I was a Muppets kid. And I think you can tell stories with Muppets because you can do things that are edgy. Like our Trump puppet has a fantastic Trump voice, but he's cute. And that allows you to kind of listen to what's behind it in a way that I think is useful, deliver messages. So when we first did the puppets, my people asked me, please don't do this. Okay, because governments are gonna ban us and all of that. Please don't do this. And which, for me is like, I'm really gonna do this, right? And then my head of my Middle East practice said, okay, Ian, I know that you're committed to this. Please do not do a Mohammed bin Salman puppet because you will be banned from the kingdom. And it's going to be, they do not have a sense of humor. They kill people, right? They kill people. So I call my guys. And first of all, the puppet makers are completely disreputable as a tribe, right? Because they're very creative, but they don't understand, they have no sense of timeline, a deliverable, they do what they want, they live in vans. It's really fun. But we get in touch with them. I'm like, I need a Mohammed bin Salman puppet, okay? And I don't want him to be super fat. He's got to be cute, and he's got to be kind of savvy, kind of edgy, because he's bringing the kingdom. Like, he's got problems, but he's also like kind of brave. So anyway, they do it, and the first thing we do with this is we have the Mohammed bin Salman puppet. And if you haven't seen this, you have to see this. It's great. And we have him doing a New York comedy cellar stand-up routine. And he starts off and he's like, yeah, he said, so women can drive now. Yeah, I finally let them. But have you seen them try to parallel park? So I had to fired all the religious police, and I had to rehire them as traffic cops. And it's like, and so we use that to get in, right? And then we start addressing the McKinsey scandal and the Khashoggi scandal. And it's 3 minutes, and literally this is a better sense of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, good, bad, and surreal, than I think you could have gotten from an interview. Not only that, but people were talking about it. So then I went to see Princess Rima, who's the Saudi ambassador in Washington, who I've known for a long time. And she had never heard it or seen it. So I show her on my phone. And she loves it because it meets them where they are. Yeah, of course. It's respect. It wasn't a problem because it was kind. It wasn't, you can criticize. You're allowed to criticize if you're a friend. You're allowed to criticize if that person knows that you don't hate them. You're not trying to hurt them. So I want to get into their safe space so they know I'm authentic. They can trust me, and then I can tell them what's really going on, some of which will be uncomfortable. But that's what the puppets do. That's what the puppets do.
And in speaking about trying to communicate, to who are you trying to communicate to? I mean, maybe that's what my real question is. When you're out there, is it the layman on this that you're trying to get to? Is it sort of like the everyday person? There's an aspect of what you do that's obviously very specific. People are interested in finance, people are interested in politics. But are you also, really trying to just get to the everyday person? I think the viral puppetry part of it is a way to kind of get, as you say, meet people where they are. But is that where you're trying to? I'm just trying to understand, like, who's the audience that you're really ultimately trying to get to?
It's a barbell, right? I mean, on the one hand, it is speaking truth to power. It is the world leaders that need to hear things that the people in their inner circle that rely on them for power or money or both will not tell them, and I don't care. So that's part of the barbell. And the other part of the barbell is young people. Young people around the world who are smart and would be politically engaged, but not with people that they don't trust. So it's both of those things. And I mean, if I look at what Oprah's done, I mean, not on topics that I spend a lot of time thinking about or I'm expert on, but I mean, I see her ability around the world to cut through and be authentic with people, that they know she's kind. And so they're willing to listen, they're willing to engage. My field is much more narrow than hers. Mine is the world of global politics. But that is that part of the barbell. That's how you want to connect. Yeah.
As a political science, scientist, you've started a finance company looking at trying to understand how the impact of geopolitical politics, et cetera, affects these markets. What have you seen change in the last number of years in the finance world as it reflects back on different cultural changes and shifts?
I'll tell you what I haven't seen. I haven't seen globalization fall apart. I haven't seen a fragmentation where suddenly, I mean, again, what we've experienced in our lifetime so far has been people and ideas and capital and goods moving faster and faster and faster across the world. There are certainly a lot of political trends to create barriers to entry, and 100% tariffs from the U.S. on Chinese EVs, and Indian export controls on rice, for example. We see that it's definitely happening, but it's of such a smaller magnitude than the continued desire and need for scale and engagement. And so what I see right now is there are two technologies in the world that are probably the most transformative for investment for the entire global economy, every country in the world and every sector. One is artificial intelligence, and one is the transition to post-carbon energy. It's the move from coal and oil and eventually gas into wind and solar and nuclear and EVs. The very interesting thing about this is that the Americans are in the lead on AI. And most countries around the world, and you see it this week, are actually making deals with American companies and the US government in terms of the reg structure to make sure they have that access. But the Chinese companies and government dominate the post-carbon energy transition. They've got the nuclear plants. They can do the permitting. They've got the really effective electric vehicles and battery technology. They've got the wind. They've got the solar. And so you've got countries all over the world that want to work with China on that. So what's really interesting, and actually a very hopeful thing, is that even if the US and China want to beat each other up, even if they want to go into Cold War, very hard to have a Cold War if only two countries want to fight it, right? And the reality is you got 193 countries here, represented at the United Nations, and there are 191 of them that recognize that they have to work with both countries if they want to have access to the world's new transformative technologies. And I think that's a great thing. We need to remember that because no one's going to talk about that, right? It's not sexy. It's not a headline. It doesn't create conflict. It actually takes the temperature down. But when you have enough time to explain that to people, that's interesting. Yeah.
I just want to ask one last question, just as we are coming up on the election and pretty soon. What do you think is the most important topic that isn't being talked about by either party that really affects us most directly?
Well, I mean, the most important one, but super boring, is institutional reform. It's the fact that we actually need new structures. I mean, the Security Council, right? Here we have the Security Council. Russia has a veto on the Security Council. I mean, they've literally broken, everything the UN stands for with their illegal invasion of Ukraine, but they can still stop everything from going through the Security Council. Why? Because they won World War II. That's why they have them, and we can't get rid of them. And yet the two countries of scale that are most committed to rule of law, upholding common human rights, and have the influence to do so are Japan and Germany. And neither of them can have permanent seats on the Security Council. Why not? Because they lost World War II. That's objectively pretty stupid, right? And there are lots of things when we look at the World Trade Organization, when we look at the IMF, when we look at all of these organizations, what we see is that the realities that made these institutions very, very useful when we created them actually no longer apply, which means you need to reform the institutions. The United States is the only country individually with the power to really make a move in that direction. It is not a priority. It needs to be a priority. By the way, Kamala Harris, as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, is someone who doesn't like when Biden talks about the world as us versus them, democracies versus autocracies. She doesn't like that. She actually is more aligned with what I'm talking about, but it is hardly a priority.
nor is it a real expertise. So it would have to be her cabinet that would drive that, and that makes it more challenging. She's not that kind of a leader on that issue. Trump is much more transactional and much more unilateral. He believes that if you have a relationship with one other country, not a whole bunch, common values, that only screws you. It ties you down. It stops you from doing what you want. He's a real estate guy. He wants the most money from whoever's going to buy his property. So he's interested in getting in a room individually with other countries and getting a better deal for the United States, which he did in a lot of cases when he was president, but that allows the architecture to continue to erode. So I think that's the most important thing, but we're not spending much time actually talking about it. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you. It's been a great discussion. I'm, terrified about a lot of things that you said, but also buoyed, obviously by it. And I do think it's really important to meet people where they are, and I really appreciate that sentiment. I think that's that characterizes a lot of the things that you do, is that you really communicate in a way that I think is, financial people, political scientists, pundits are folks that often speak down to people and don't speak to people and have conversations. And I find that is very, that's something that I see that you do that I think is very refreshing. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you both.